Okay. Welcome, everyone, to the regular meeting of the Traverse City Planning Commission, February 6th. Do we need to take a roll call vote? Roll call. Okay.
Commissioner Deturi?
Here.
Commissioner George?
Here.
Commissioner Knapp?
Here.
Commissioner Hershey?
Here.
Commissioner Heller?
Here.
Commissioner McGillivray?
Here.
Commissioner Teller?
Here.
Commissioner Anderson?
Here.
Commissioner O'Brien?
Here.
And Commissioner Treadwell is not here at the moment.
Welcome to Commissioner McGillivray for joining us again on the Planning Commission. Do we have any announcements?
Excuse me, the main announcement is that we will be closed, the city offices, on Monday, February 19th, in observance of President's Day. That moves the City Commission to February 20th, their regular business meeting. And the Planning Commission study session will be moved to Wednesday, February 21st. That will be a joint City Commission, Planning Commission meeting. Depending if the bylaws are adopted tonight, that would change our meeting start date to 6 p.m. So just be note of that. We'll follow up in an email after the meeting with some reminders. But there will be 3 items in particular that we'll be talking about that night. The first one is as we enter the Master Plan Mobility Action Plan review and approval process, just going through with everyone the timeline, expectations, requirements of state law, and things like that. So everyone's aware of it. The next is the City Commission, along with the Coalition to End Homelessness and Safe Harbor, entered into a memorandum of understanding, looking at some solutions for year-round support for those experiencing homelessness. At this time, I believe the Safe Harbor will be submitting an application on the 20th for a new SLUP to potentially have a year-round shelter at their current facility. So being that it is a SLUP, it'll have to go through the Planning Commission. And since the City Commission has signed the MOU, we thought it would be a good idea to have both bodies together with the applicant discussing their intent so everyone's hearing the same information as that process is getting started. And then the third and final item, as of now for that night, is the discussion on short-term rental limits in the districts besides C1, C2, and D2. When we discussed this at the January meeting, it was indicated from some of the planning commissioners that they would like to share or gather some thoughts from the City Commission before investing too much time on that. So in other words, what is some direction that they'd be willing to consider to guide you in that process? So that is all for now.
Thank you. We move into approval of minutes, and unless anyone has objections to anything in the minutes, we can put this into one motion for both December 5th and January 17th.
I move to approve the regular meeting minutes from December 5th, 2023, and the special meeting minutes from January 17th, 2024.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries. That takes us to old business. Mr. Winter.
Yeah, so last month we reviewed the bylaws and had a discussion on any possible amendments that the commission would like to make as just kind of an annual best practice. Staff did submit in that packet some changes. Most of it was formatting or some strange redundant language or things that didn't really resonate in today's world. So those changes are what you see in red. There were some additional discussions. Those edits have been added in the blue text that you see in your packet. The most notable of which, again, was the discussion moving the meeting time up from 7 p.m. to 6 p.m. with the cutoff for new business shifting from 10 to 9 p.m. Of course, the Planning Commission can vote to add new business after that if they so desire. There were some discussions that Chair Hershey mentioned at the beginning of the meeting. If you would like, I'd have you go ahead and share those. I think they dealt with the section on officers.
Actually, there was a couple. So what I noted was under presiding officer, what it says is the chairperson shall preside. And Ms. McGillivray, I took your comment a couple weeks ago as a presiding officer could not be a chairperson, but this specifically talks about the chairperson. So I was suggesting that that language be put into the chairperson category as A, and then B would be vice chairperson, and then C would be should neither the chairperson nor the vice chairperson be present, we could call that presiding officer. Since the presiding officer sentence relates to just the chairperson. So that was one suggestion I made. And then there's a lettering under procedure. That's a new section, so I'm suggesting it should start as A and not D. And then on page 6G, the word was changed to applicant, so it should be in the event an applicant instead of a applicant. So that's what I suggested. Does anybody,
What was that last one, I'm sorry?
oops,
Or which section?
it was under procedure, letter G on page 6, in the event an applicant instead of the event a applicant. Because you changed petitioner to applicant. Yes, Ms. Anderson.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to bring some attention to Section 8, Public Hearings, Paragraph A. There's some softening of language there regarding the function and hence the value and use of public hearing testimony and documentation, where the previous language indicated the process will, in many cases, require consideration, and the commission shall therefore determine a meeting date at which a decision will be rendered. And I just wanted to bring up the softening of that language and ask about the rationale.
Yeah, there's no requirement under the Zoning Enabling Act or Planning Enabling Act that would prohibit a decision to be made after a public hearing. So therefore, by saying that it can't be made, that hasn't been the practice in the 3 years that I've been here ever before. So that was changed just to reflect the actual practice. Now, that doesn't prohibit from deferring a decision to another meeting if something came from the public hearing or the decision at that meeting. This just provides the commission with the option.
Okay, thank you.
Anyone else have any comments on the bylaws as presented? Okay,
Go ahead and ask another.
all right.
This is under Section 9 on public comment, Paragraph C. I just wondered if we should clarify that the public comment by a planning commissioner, if it would be prudent for us to clarify that this applies to both agenda items and general comment, or if it doesn't, to specify that?
Well, I think the way it's capitalized, the public comment section is essentially an agenda item that's at the end where anything can be spoken of. The Planning Commission
So you're
has the...
referring to general comment?
Yeah,
then?
yeah, because the Planning Commission, of course, can speak during, it's your meeting, during any agenda item, but that is where discussion under, in this case, it's item 8 on our agenda, can be made by a planning commissioner on any topic, essentially,
Okay.
not
And-
limited to the business at hand.
And so I just found a bit of ambiguity in that if we as commissioners do have the opportunity to both comment from the public podium on individual agenda items as well as a wrap-up general comment, I thought it might be helpful to make that perfectly clear. Maybe it's clear in everybody else's minds.
Okay, so. Okay, let me make sure I'm hearing what you're saying. So I think this C was geared towards just planning commissioners who wish to make a public comment.
Correct.
But what you're saying is, it says at the designated public comment section. But we do have a designated public comment section after every agenda item. So that would give the planning commissioner the chance at any time to make a public comment. That would be how I would respond.
Yeah, and the way I see this reading is, I mean, as commissioners, you can speak on any topic. You're not the public. You know, it's
Correct.
your business and your agenda. So it's not referring to conversing over any agenda item. And so therefore, as a planning commissioner, it wouldn't make any sense to go to the podium to speak from just having the conversation that you're entitled to as your meeting unfolds. This is saying specifically in that open public comment, which is designated for any
On the
topic,
agenda.
that planning commissioners also are allowed to speak on any topic they want there too. So that's how I interpret it.
Yeah.
Because again, you by default, it's your meeting. You don't have to open yourself up to public comment. You're allowed to discuss whenever you want.
Well, I would merely respond that I could envision occasions when a commissioner might wish to speak on a particular topic as a member of the public, not as a commissioner, and might take the public podium as a result. So as long as it's clear to everyone that remains an option, then I'm happy.
As it is an option. That's how I read it, that it is an option. To me, that's how it reads, that it is an option.
Okay? All
Does
right.
anybody else have any thoughts on that? Nope. Okay. Anyone else? So we can do the motion before the public.
I have a quick question. So I wasn't at the last meeting, I did watch it, and everyone is pretty much on board with the 6 o'clock meeting time.
Yes,
Okay,
almost everyone.
okay. Well, I mean, my personal preference would to keep it at 7, but if it's clear majority, and it seems to be a lot of nodding heads, would prefer 6, so I'm okay with that.
Everyone still okay with that? Okay, so I'd like to entertain a motion, right, to adopt these bylaws.
So moved. I'll make the motion.
Okay, is there support?
Do we need to include the suggested changes that you recommended?
Oh, yeah, well, it says,
And
yes,
instead of,
amended, yeah, as amended. It would be, I move to adopt the planning commission bylaws as amended.
I make the motion to adopt the Planning Commission bylaws of the Traverse City Planning Commission as amended.
second.
Do we have any public comment on the bylaws? Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All opposed? The bylaws are adopted. Congratulations. All right, let's move to new business. A, consideration of a rezoning request from the Boardman Building LLC, designated applicant of Traverse City Area Public Schools to rezone the property at 412 West Webster Street from R2 to D2. Mr. Winter.
Yeah, thank you. We received an application for this rezoning of the Ida Tompkins building owned by TCAPS across the street here at the corner of Webster and Boardman Avenue. If you recall, this was in your agenda packet in the past, I believe in June or sometime in the summer, when the applicant at that time was considering a conditional rezoning. Further discussions transpired with staff as well as the TCAPS administration, and ultimately the applicant revised their application for a straight rezoning. So essentially what the applicant is trying to do is preserve the building. It is currently zoned R2, which is two-family or mixed-use, mixed-density residential now, which allows up to 2 families per lot. Based on the minimum lot size for that district, you could increase the density by splitting the land, but that would ultimately require the demolition of the building, which is what the applicant, who is working towards a purchase agreement or is in a purchase, has a purchase agreement with TCAPS, is trying to avoid. So with the change of zoning to D2, this would open up some more options for them. They are looking at a number of options at this time. There is no specific site plan that is before you for approval. Really, you're considering whether or not the D2 designation makes sense for this property. So when looking at the current future land use map, you will see that the future land use categories of, I believe it is TC3 and TC5, kind of run right through this property. Unlike zoning district boundaries, future land use boundaries are intentionally somewhat ambiguous because properties can be split and they're not rough lines that or strict lines that follow parcel boundaries and things like that. So when you look at the descriptions of the TC3, which is more of a traditional neighborhood, and TC5, which is like more of a downtown neighborhood, the existing building fits more with the TC5, which again aligns with the current master plan. Furthermore, that would be a natural extension of the existing D2 district that exists on the north side and south side of 8th Street in that section right on the other side of the alley. So by rezoning to D2, we are prohibiting any kind of spot zoning, which most municipal attorneys would strongly advise against, because districts are supposed to be a collection of properties rather than single islands of properties. Now, of course, when you open it up to D2 zoning, that would allow many more uses that are allowed there currently. However, with the intent of preserving the building itself would prohibit many of those uses from existing. I know from reading the article today that the property, I believe, has some deed restrictions on it, and that it can't be demolished for 25 years. Short-term rentals can't occur there, so I know that's a consideration of the Planning Commission. The D2 would limit it to 25% anyways, compared to some of the other D and commercial districts. So that is what is up for consideration with this application. Tonight, no action is requested of the Planning Commission other than to set the public hearing that is required for any rezoning. That public hearing would be held on March 5th if moved today, after which the Planning Commission could make a recommendation to the City Commission, who has the final say in the changing of the zoning designation. With that, we do have the applicant, Ken Richmond, here, and his business partner, as well as some other partners in the property who I believe may be willing to speak about their vision, because right now I think a lot is in flux, and from a planning and zoning perspective, we haven't been involved in any of the deed restrictions that were referenced in the article today that if there's any questions for them, they may answer.
This is an educational question for me, please. On page 4 of the document, you mentioned that the Planning Commission had previously rezoned 3 blocks north of 8th Street to D2, and I wondered if you could sort of orient me as to which blocks those were.
That would be between Boardman and Railroad on the north side. D2 was on the south side. So the north side, I think 2 blocks were C2 and 1 was C1. But the Envision 8th Street plan that I believe is in 2016 laid forth kind of a framework for that corridor. And then the Planning Commission, and I think Chief Teller and maybe Commissioner DeTurry are the only 2 who were, maybe, Miguel, were you here then? Okay. So they worked with the planning staff at that point and not only rezoned the north side, but then made modifications to the existing D2 zoning, correct? So that's where the limitation on short-term rentals, I believe the step back above 45 feet came from that rezoning process. So, yeah.
Thank you.
If I can offer some historical context. So that was a little bit controversial with some of the neighbors. We made a lot of accommodations to try to, and I met on the city commission too, so I met personally with a large group of the neighbors on more than one occasion. So this was kind of the compromise. I don't think anybody was happy, but that's compromise. So, and I look at this property now and I'll just say, I can't see it being zoned anything else. You know, we probably should have included it then, but, you know, just adds more fat to the fire, so.
Commissioner
Yes,
Treadwell?
I'd second Commissioner McGillivary's notion that this, as a commercial type parcel adjacent to the 8th Street corridor, it would have made sense to include it along with those other 3 blocks, separating it out from the residential properties right across the street and continuing north to the Boardman neighborhood. But I'd just say, in general, I'd be in favor of collapsing the D districts into our other aspects of our zoning code because they are meant to be a specific subset of areas of town that have seen or are likely to see significant redevelopment in coming years. But unlike D1 and D3, which aside from one parcel owned by Novo, who has already submitted site plans, those have already gotten more or less fully built out. D2, I do see, even though we have seen redevelopment there, additional opportunity for both vacant land and underutilized land. So while I'd be in favor of having a more straightforward classification, say C2, the fact that the adjacent parcels are D2 makes sense.
Would anyone like to hear from the applicant? Yes? Would you like to speak?
Hey guys, I'm Ken Richmond. Eric Gerstner, my partner. I'm a local architect. Eric's a local builder type. We are both, we were neighbors literally across the street, next to each other and across Richmond School for many, many years. And so we're, local people that care about the building. We do have a purchase agreement with TCAPS. We close early summer is the schedule. Our goal is to save the building through some sort of adaptive reuse, and we're looking at different options that include residential, office use, and even a mix. We're in the middle of putting our team together, whatever that means exactly. We're doing our due diligence, and we're dealing with environmental issues and funding, and it's going really well. So that's where we are. So we appreciate your support for what we're trying to do. Thanks for your time.
Anybody have any questions of Mr. Richmond? Thank you, sir.
Sure.
Any other comments? Mr. McGillivray?
I have just one. It's, I think I asked Mr. Winter this earlier, or in an email, and that is that the applicant is not TCAPS. It is just so if this purchase doesn't go through, then you don't pursue the rezoning, then we would have to start over with a new applicant. It'd be nice if TCAPS, for the city anyways, for your time and ours, it'd be nice if TCAPS was part of the application, because I think it being rezoned D2 is probably the only rezoning you're going to get there.
So if the rezoning gets approved by the city commission, and let's say Boardman Builders LLC
Right, doesn't
walks
matter.
away, the change still stays in place. Yep, so we wouldn't actually start over on it.
But just if they decide not to go through with it.
Yeah.
Hopefully that won't happen. Not trying to jinx you, but just saying,
And on the other side of that, TCAPS, as a separately operating school district, is functionally exempt from our zoning code. So they can have what is functionally an office building in an R2 district where it wouldn't be allowed. So if TCAPS was developing this property on their own, they wouldn't need to seek any rezoning if they wanted it.
Yeah, that's a good point for some of the newer commissioners. Public schools are exempt from zoning, so we don't review their plans. They get reviewed by the state superintendent, and I wasn't here for it, but that may be why this parcel wasn't considered in the D2 at the time, because I don't think there was much talk of TCAPS
No, there
loading it
wasn't.
back then. So to your point, why
No.
add flame, fuel to
Right.
the fire?
I'll make a motion. I move that the request initiated by Boardman Building LLC authorize applicant to rezone the property commonly located at 412 Webster Street and commonly known as the Ida Tompkins Building from R2 Mixed Density Residential District to D2 Development District Depot Area be set for a public hearing at the Planning Commission regular meeting on March 5th, 2024.
Support.
You? We have a motion and support. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you very much. Okay.
You guys tomorrow. We have a meeting.
So we move to be under new business consideration of the City of Traverse City Capital Improvement Plan 2024-25 to 2029-30 for introduction and to set a public hearing for March 5th, 2024. Mr. Winter.
Yeah, thank you. So the city staff and the city manager have been working for a number of months on the annual capital improvements plan. This is a 6-year plan that outlines essentially capital projects or major maintenance projects that the city will need to consider in their annual budget process, or know that they're coming so they can start budgeting for them into the future. Over the years, this process, as you guys know, has been revamped, those of you who've been around for a little bit, and some criteria has been established for what qualifies for a capital improvements project. As we discussed before, it really lost its usefulness there for a while because it became a catch-all of everything. Like things that should just be in a department's budget for normal operating costs were going into the CIP. You know, and so it's been streamlined to reduce. I know some of you have been around for a few years. That used to be like 200 projects. Now we're down to 69 by using that criteria, which is helpful because this is just one set of inputs into the budget. So it's one thing to be considered when that decision gets made. So I want to emphasize that the capital improvements plan is a plan. It's not the budget. It is a tool used to inform the budget. Not everything in the CIP ends up budgeted, and not everything in the budget came from the CIP. So just kind of keep that in mind as you explore some of these. And so really what it's focusing on in the CIP is the assets that the city owns that have low condition ratings that need to be replaced. We have capacity issues. The project is called for in a plan, and therefore budgeting it is necessary in order to implement that plan, or it's a project necessary to protect health, safety, and welfare. So those are some of the lenses that we look through when the various city department heads start programming their projects into this. One new thing this year is the formation of the design team, which brings all the development department heads together once a week so that we can have better coordination on these projects. There may be opportunities to tie projects together to save on costs, where before, admittedly, we were all kind of operating in silos. This gives us a time every week to work on projects in the same room. And for better or worse, we learn from each other. You know, I'm learning what fire looks at when they look into a review. I'm learning about things about water that I never knew about in the water system. So I think it's going to create a better product in the future as we start to unroll this. It really just started in the fall. So again, it's a continuation. So we've put together some tools for you that are on the link that I want to bring up, which is the capital improvements homepage. So this is on the website, available for all the public. The program that we use is called Lucity. That is what everyone enters their projects for. It's been around for a long time. It leaves a lot to be desired, and we've been looking for a number of months now at a new application, essentially, because this one never really was meant for CIP use. It was a program that the city and, frankly, a lot of communities across the country were using for asset management, databases, and program or project management. So once a project is up and running, where is it in that phase, keeping track of hours that people have spent on it, and things like that. They pitched to the city at one point a pilot they wanted to use the city for to try a new CIP module, and the city agreed, and we've used it ever since. When you pull it up and look at it, you'd think it was some beta version from 1996. There's no user friendliness to it. So we've had some demos with other vendors. We'll likely do an RFP to see which one is got the best price on it, because it's really limited in the reporting that we can do. So there's really 2 reports that we have on here that are mentioned in your memo. And so down here, this is the draft version for this year. We have the executive summary, which is just an overview of the CIP program, and then the 2 reports. So the spreadsheet by fund is essentially that. We have these different project funds. So this breaks it down with not much information, not much narrative to it, but just really the numbers. But each page is therefore a different fund that is being used. The other one is the narrative and spreadsheet by program. So this one's much longer. It has all 69 projects, 1 per page, but this creates more background information. So if you want to read the description of it, you can go ahead and check it out using that one. Now, with those 2 reports, there's some information that may not make sense to you. It's not very intuitive. So that's why we put this document kind of front and center, and this is how to interpret it. It talks about the 2 different reports, the criteria used for selecting projects to be added to the CIP, and then we have the coding, the different programs that the city has divided projects into, and then project categories. So we have capital projects, we have operation and maintenance projects, and we have visionary projects. Then, of course, description, funding source, cost detail, and service impact. As of last year, our GIS director did a great job finding a way to incorporate Lucidity into our GIS system. So if you're more of a spatial learner, this may be a way that you prefer to look at these projects. So right here, we have the 6-year GIS map. So if you come to this portion, the About This app in the upper right-hand corner, it'll give you a little overview of how to use this. You see different colors on the map right there. The legend tells you which program those colors refer to. You can also go to that page I was just at by clicking the CIP homepage. So if you want to go back and read the narrative or something like that. On the left-hand side, you have a couple different toggles you can use. The first one is you can select either all 6 years to be displayed at once, 6 fiscal years that's looking into, or you can pick a specific year. So if you want to narrow it down, you can pick an individual one or look at them all, or you can pick from which department that project originated. So you can get into much finer detail by picking a specific year and a specific department. So you'll see just the projects there that that department has programmed for that year. Doesn't mean it's budgeted yet, doesn't mean that the funds have been secured yet, but it's just in the works. So typically what happens is staff will start looking for grant opportunities if one's required, speaking with Brian in our treasurer's office to see what fund balances may have money to use for that. And then down here, as you go ahead and filter these, it limits the list. You can click all and see each of the individual projects on this side. And if you pick it, it will just highlight that one project. Now, what you can do, instead of using these navigation tools, you can just simply click one on the map and it will pop up with much of the information from those previous reports imported. So again, if you're spatial and you want to see it to kind of understand it, this may be a better tool to use. So it provides a lot of that information, the project description, allows you to filter through it. Now, some things don't have a certain destination. It may be something that the city's looking to do citywide, in which case that project may be pinned to the city department's office. So you might want to play around with that, like some of the DDA projects are in that location or in that format. One example, too, is if you take the wastewater treatment plant, there's a lot of projects over the next 6 years scheduled. And you can tell by looking right here, you'll see that what pops up is one of the 10 projects that have been geolocated at that location. So you can see the first one listed here. If you want to see the others, you simply click these arrows right or left and go through the list. And in case you're curious, the order that they appear is by CIP number, which every time a new project is added, a new unique CIP number is assigned to it. The higher the number, the more recent it is. If it's a very low number, it's been sitting there for a while and years have passed since anything has happened. So another example, if you come over here, for instance, this is the DPS building. That's where Parks is located, so that's why here we have multiple park bathrooms. Since it's multiple, we don't have a specific location to tie it to, so there's quite a bit to consider. Also, the West Side sanitary sewer lining. This was pinned in this location because this is the office of the Department of Municipal Utilities. So again, it's a broad location, therefore it's just given a spot at the office. So with that, a couple things moving forward. Again, the Planning Commission is required to hold a public hearing on this to determine whether or not these projects are consistent with the master plan. So the simplest of example, and doesn't really apply in our city since we're kind of developed, is if you have a master plan that says, hey, this part of the city in the future land use map is dedicated for conservation, and there's a project in the CIP that talks about running water and sewer to it, well, that's inconsistent. That's putting in infrastructure to support future development. And besides that, just looking at the location character and extent. Now, I will say, our current master plan as it relates to this process is challenging. If you ever looked at our master plan, it's not prescriptive. And that was intentional at the time. The master plan before that was very prescriptive. So it's hard to say whether a specific project ties to the master plan. It's really subjective in how you have to apply and interpret the master plan. The master plan that we're working on right now is going back to the 2 versions ago, where it will have a specific 5-year action plan. So there'll be much greater opportunity for the Planning Commission to look at those items in that 5-year action plan and help inform the CIP process, because we actually have something to guide us, where right now we just kind of have vague statements, which is challenging. Yeah, so I think that's really about it at this time. Just there will be a need to hold a public hearing, and so that would be the only action that is required today. I know what it was I was thinking about. There may be questions as you look through this between now and next month. We will follow up with an email to have any questions that you would like to have answered sent to us. If we can have staff answer it in a satisfactory way, that's what we'll try to do. We will try to get that question to them, get an answer to you. If you're pleased with that answer, we will compile the question and the answer in the document for everyone to see at that public hearing. However, if you're still confused on it and you want that staff member to come to the public hearing, we'll try to make those arrangements. But we don't want to ask all the department heads to come just in case. So that's why we're trying to get the questions and answers taken care of beforehand. But again, we'll provide whatever information that you need overall. That's it.
Okay. So what I'm hearing prior to us discussing this is there are three things. First, you read through the projects and make sure they're consistent with the current master plan. Second is if you have any questions before the next month, you send them to Katie. And then Katie will compile the answers and send them to the rest of us. And the third would be to set the required public hearing date for March 5th. So with that, does anybody have any comments about the CIP? I will start. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
These are process-oriented questions, I guess. One was within the commentary, Sean, I think you had mentioned that the interim city manager had put a cap or put on hiatus the process of adding new projects to the CIP. I wondered, is that still in place? And if so, do you anticipate it being lifted in the near future?
Yeah, that was just only for this year because we had more projects than we were
For
even.
this fiscal?
Yeah.
Okay.
Even capable of funding. Some projects we did move out further, knowing that there just wasn't going to be money this year. So some of those changes were made. And again, we're going to have the master plan coming up this year that's going to provide us much greater information for this next year. Yeah, so it's not like a forever cap. It was just for this year's iteration.
Okay, and part two of that, well, actually, I have two more parts. One is, in terms of the priorities that have been entered into Lucity for the individual projects, that is, those priorities are in the judgment of the submitter of the project? Is that where those are sourced?
Yeah, I would agree with that.
Okay, and then my final question has to do with the design team. And what are your feelings about the progress that they've been making in terms of breaking down the silos? Do you see the team becoming primarily a project management and implementation body, or do you see it having a more strategic function?
I wouldn't call it project implementation because the team meets to discuss the projects prior to them being implemented. So the individual department head is overseeing it as the project manager. It really is about the design of projects, capital projects. They also review public projects together. So let me back up. Private projects that require a stormwater permit. So anything that's 3 or more dwelling units or a commercial property. So a single-family home wouldn't have to go to the design team. A garage wouldn't have to go to the design team. Someone wants to build a multifamily development, it would go to the design team. Essentially, what was happening in the past is that each department was conducting their review one after another. It took a little bit of time, but now we're all sitting in the room saying, hey, I think you should move this here, and fire's being like, well, if you move that there, then so we're working more collaboratively than we ever have before. Well, in the most recent years. Back in the day, they used to have something called the PI team when we had our own building construction code office here in the city. So that stood for planning, inspections, and engineering. We outsourced the construction code to the county some years ago. The whole PI team kind of fell apart. So now we're bringing that concept back.
Thank you.
Yep. And I will say, as far as the strategy component goes, in the design team policy, we have our guiding documents, and they're broken down by department, like which department typically administers each document. So for instance, the planning department has listed, the master plan, the mobility action plan, even though they're not adopted yet. Some of those other ones where, Art at the Department of Municipal Utilities has his various plans. So we're expecting him to speak for what those plans call for when we do this process.
Thanks.
Any comments from anyone else? It's certainly shorter than in previous years. That was a good thing. So the motion before you is to set the public hearing on this for March 5th. Would anyone like to make that motion?
I'll make the motion that the Planning Commission move to set the formal draft CIP public hearing for March 5th, 2024.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and support. Public comment. Oh, he's Mr. Werner.
Good evening. Tim Werner, 608 West 7th Street, city resident. I'd like to start by apologizing for last year, not quite this time, it was a month later, but March, when you were approving the CIP, but 5 of you, I think, included a letter or a memo to go with the CIP, encouraging the city commission, though it wasn't in the CIP, encouraging the city commission to include in the budget pedestrian improvements for Milliken, Eastern Avenue, as well as connections to the Boardman Lake Trail at Carver, Franklin, and 10th Street. However, the meeting at which that document arrived was the same meeting with all the turmoil where we dismissed the city manager. So I myself never saw it arrive. Nobody else on the commission spoke of seeing it arrive. So to the best of my knowledge, nobody saw it arrive. And even not seeing it arrive, I knew it had been intended, but again, with that turmoil, just completely out of mind. So I apologize, but I'm back because here we are a year later. MDOT is that much closer to their project. And even though I was asked not to be here, I'm here. And I'm here because I'm an advocate. I'm an advocate for pedestrians and people on bicycles. And we don't have an entity in this town that advocates for pedestrians, people on bicycles. And we're a small city government, so we don't have a department of pedestrians. So there's not a department head of the Department of Pedestrians that's submitting things to the CIP to get those items on the list. And so I'm here to request that some or all of you also be advocates for pedestrians and people on bicycles. Maybe it's not by adding it to the CIP just now, but hopefully the CIP process does improve in the coming year or two, because it's not just extent, character, and whatever the other term is. There's also sins of omission, like, yes, what's in there, but I was a teenager once, and I would admit things that I didn't want my parents to know. And so, yes, everything that's in there currently is probably great, but what about the things that aren't in there? So I would just ask that you ponder that, ask that you be advocates also for pedestrians especially. The MDOT project will be here next month, which is right around the corner. And there's still no sidewalk on Eastern Avenue. There's gaps on Milliken, and we can do better. Thank you.
Well, okay, well, he's got me going now, so.
Okay, and me too.
I was going to
I'll let you
hold
go
for a
first.
little bit, but
I'll let you go
it's until the next meeting. Because I asked exactly what our role is here, and it's kind of, in some ways, it's kind of confusing because partly says it's some areas it says this is the Planning Commission's plan, but Mr. Winter clarified for me today, that actually the city assigned it to the city manager, who did it for a while and then sent it to planning, and it sounds like our only goal here, or his obligation is to, is strictly to see if, I don't know, is it our plan? That's my question. Is it our plan? Can we add things? So I know from being a city commissioner how difficult it is to add things by the time it gets here. And I understand, and I agree with Commissioner Warner, there's a lot of things on here I think are missing, it should be on it. But I also understand the city's, position trying to change it. And I kind of wonder if if it's really, we just hold the public hearing, listen to people, and then, send it on. What's our role? It's very unclear to me, so.
Yeah, I mean, the reality is it is a staff-created document under the guidance of the city commission, for each of the departments based on their expertise and stuff like that. And as I said in the onset, though, that doesn't mean that these are the only projects that can be budgeted. Tim can go to the city commission in the budget process. Tim can instruct his employee, the city manager, to instruct us to put together a proposal, and any new trail or anything like that would come to you, and that's a great opportunity to advocate, like, yes, this is something that, yes, this character, location, extent, this is what we're supposed to be looking at, this is the process, we support this. We recommend approval to the city commission, like you have with other past capital projects when they meet the criteria outlined in the Planning Enabling Act. So, as I was saying also at the beginning too, like without any kind of framework in our master plan, and that's what you guys hold is the master plan, there's nothing to guide the Planning Commission and say, hey, we want to see this put in there because our plan that we're the stewards of is saying that needs to go in there. We'll have a different opportunity next year that we haven't had since 2009. So with that, we're also discussing, this goes back to, Jackie's previous comment about design team. We talked last week of taking this and although it's like guidelines, but formalizing it into a policy so that everyone has it and we can follow it. So I'd be open to, the way it worked with the design team is they kind of created the policy and then worked with the city manager, but bringing that draft to the Planning Commission to see where you guys think you would work best in that CIP process, if that helps.
Yeah, I like that idea, because, right now, my feeling has been, we don't put things into this CIP. That comes from staff, the various staff from the various entities. But I agree with what was been said, too, that it's a tool for budgeting. So I don't understand, Mr. Werner, you as a city commissioner during the budgeting process, why you can't ask for a line item in the budget for this. And if they say, well, we can't afford it this year, but it's in place for next year, that's my understanding of the whole thing, is that we don't create the CIP, or that you go to the proper staff person, or in this case, if I were a city commissioner, I would definitely go to the manager and say, how can I get this in? But I don't believe it's, at least for now, the process we currently have, that it's the Planning Commission putting things into the CIP. That's staff-driven.
Yeah, Mr. Winter, I have a quick question for you. Does the planning department ever put anything into the CIP? Because you really don't have any, you participate in it.
Yeah,
but
so
you
our
never
role,
really suggest anything.
so we're really the facilitators of the
Exactly,
process. And we, in that process, really push the master plan, whatever it calls for, which again is light right now, so we don't have a lot of leverage. There are some things in there listed under planning and zoning that you'll see my name on, but they predate my time at the city. But when I took over, Russ's name got changed to my name in there for some of those. So, besides the city, I don't think I added anything last year. I don't think I added anything this year. So we'll see where that goes.
But we did send that memo up last year,
Correct.
and we could do that again.
Mm-hmm.
None of us are saying it's not an important issue.
Yeah. We could have that same memo sent with this when it goes. So,
We include that in our packet for study session.
yeah, if anyone between now and then, or we send it out April 3rd, I think, 2023 is the packet that has that memo in it. City Commission packet.
But we can have one at our next session.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, okay.
Yep.
Great. Is there any other discussion? Okay, so would somebody like to make a motion to set the public hearing?
We already did that, Debbie.
Oh, I'm sorry, you're right. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Thank you. Motion carries. All right, so next is the consideration of the Traverse City Light and Power Capital Improvement Plan 2024-25 to 2029-30 for introduction and to set a public hearing also for March 5th. Mr. Winter.
Yeah, so this is essentially the same thing. The only change is the way it's been structured. In the past, Traverse City Light and Power has always created their own capital improvements plan. Per the city charter, the planning commission will hold a public hearing on that, and then it too will go to the city commission. In the past, they, as a courtesy, would go in and re-enter everything from their program into Lucity, and it was in one document. The design team, which Light and Power is part of, felt this year that although they appreciated that courtesy, that was an unnecessary redundancy for them to do that, since they're already creating a report. And they don't use Lucity for any of the other stuff either, so they were really just accessing it once a year to enter projects. So therefore, they accepted it as a separate document, which is how it used to be done way back in the past. But since it is a separate document, we felt it would be appropriate to have it as a separate public hearing and separate agenda item. Same thing applies. If you read through that, ask us questions. We definitely know less about all these than the other CIP, but we'd be happy to work with Tony and Carla and all of them at Light and Power to get the answers that you need. But other than that, it would be just setting a public hearing for the same date.
Anybody have any comments on?
Question, so this is a consolidated meeting, same date, same time? Or,
Same meeting, yep, just multiple public hearings. We'll have 3 on that date potentially.
right?
Yep. Which I will just add, in most communities, they don't allow public comment on specific agenda items unless it's a public hearing. So that's why acts call for setting public hearings, allow people to speak specifically on.
And would we be expecting a member of TCLP to be present at that meeting, or only if we request it because we have a certain amount of questions? Because that's
Correct.
typically how it worked last year.
Yep.
Like, if we had a certain amount of questions for staff, they would come and answer them.
Correct, yeah. So
Okay.
we would use the same format. So if you have questions on this, just like the city CIP, you can email them to us. We'll try to seek out the answer. I've been in communication with Carla over at Light and Power, and they'll have staff present if that is needed, and we can't get those answered. May I ask a question of the audience? Commissioner Warner, please. So Commissioner Warner, as a city commissioner, also serves on Light and Power, and I was just curious if you could provide any update on the climate action plan they've been working on. I know.
Don't hold me to this because it's
Yeah.
a work in.
But it's still
We've
being worked on, it's not
approved it.
adopted.
No, I think, see, that's the
Okay.
trouble. Like, I think we did, but there's so much to it. So yes, I believe we approved the climate action plan back in late '23. But there's still certain aspects to be fleshed out further. I will double check and send you all an email.
Okay, appreciate it.
Because
Thank you.
I believe that's correct, but I'm only 95% sure.
And do you anticipate it having recommendations that only apply to Light and Power projects, or do you think we would use it in city projects as well? That's what I'm trying to figure out for next year, is what to anticipate.
Excellent question, and the Light and Power Board and senior staff and our director are trying to be very careful not to tell other entities what to do. But the board has made it clear we would love to have planning, city, DDA join us in our, I'll call it journey, whatever that collaboration might mean or look like in the coming years. But as an entity, trying to be very careful not to say, hey, city, you should do this, or hey, city, or planning, you should do that. To certainly encourage and try to be a resource to help facilitate and make things possible.
So that could serve as another input for consideration next year, too. So thank you for that.
If I might, we just had our strategic planning retreat, a full day, like 2 weeks ago. And so from that to like a lot of overlap with the climate action plan as far as, okay, what do we actually hope to try to set out as plans for the coming years?
Great, thank you. Okay. Any more discussion on the Light and Power? Okay, then I would like to entertain a motion to set the public hearing.
I'll make the motion that the draft TCLP capital improvement plan for fiscal years 2024, 25 throughout through 2029-30 be introduced and set for public hearing on March 5th, 2024.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries. All right, so that takes us now to the riparian buffer ordinance draft work plan overview. Mr. Winter.
Yeah, I'm going to hand this over to
Ms.
to
Sichterman.
Ms. Sichterman, who has created a work plan to kind of talk through with the planning commission.
Hello, everyone. So last month, we talked a little bit about the riparian buffer ordinance and a committee that would be created to come up with some recommendations. Last month, there was agreement to create such a committee, and 3 of you offered to sit on that committee. I was asked to put together a work plan to see how this could get fleshed out and what the timeline might look like. So I prepared something that hopefully makes sense to everybody, that would, even though it doesn't materialize ordinance until the end of the year, it still is kind of an aggressive schedule if you've ever been involved in this kind of ordinance writing. So what I tried to do was set it up so that some of the overarching priorities and objectives are the decisions that this committee is making, so that they find common ground, find recommendations on the broad direction they'd like to go, and then let staff write the words that will create that. There, wordsmithing with a large group of people can get difficult and time-consuming, so I don't want to use our volunteers' time in that way. And then there's some feedback loops built in there, including some outreach to subject matter experts and others that we'd be looking for input from, including the public at large. We want to make sure that we get some more input from the public before we get further into the process, and that could bring us to a place where we've got something to bring to the Planning Commission and ready to set a public hearing for near the end of the year. So I guess what I'm looking for at this point is just any comments on this work plan or the concept at large, as a whole. And I'd also just let you know that probably because there was a ticker article today about today's agenda, and there was the link available within that for people to sign up to be one of the residents that would serve on this committee. We've set it up so that there would be 2. We already have 5 people who've applied that all seem very well qualified. It makes me want to try to, expand the number of residents on that committee. Again, it can be more difficult when you have more schedules to try to coordinate and when you have a lot more input. So I think you said that you wanted to have this committee to include 2 members of the public, but I think we already have gotten some great candidates for that. So I guess that's it. And again, just looking for any comments or further direction from the Planning Commission.
Well, I think you've done a great job of laying out a plan. Thank you very much. My questions are primarily regarding the selection process for the resident members, and I know we're all very familiar with the ad hoc committee process where interviews are made and the public has an opportunity to observe those. My questions have to do with, number one, are we limiting ourselves excessively in terms of the breadth of viewpoints by only having 2 resident members on the committee? And then I looked at the form that they're going to fill out and had the impression that there was going to be some extra value placed on residents who have subject matter expertise. And I wondered if that was intentional, maybe I'm misinterpreting, or are we seeking a resident perspective or a subject matter expert perspective from those folks?
You know, at this time, we haven't set up any criteria for evaluating those applications, and I guess I would defer to Sean and the chair.
Yeah, we did as staff reach out to the clerk's office, and there is no set procedure that needs to be followed for this. It's not memorialized in policy like the city commission ad hocs are or anything like that. So we are looking more at resident input. We can bring subject matter experts in, but the residents are the ones that were, largely absent from the last process. So we want to have them incorporated. Although we want at least 2, we have discussed as many as 4 because there's 4 different types of riparian boundaries. We have creeks, we have the river, we have the inland lake, we have the Great Lake. So that is a lens that we're going to use when we try to select people. We would like representation from different parts of the city, different types of riparian boundaries to provide those different perspectives. Because someone living on the bay has a very different riparian environment than someone on Kids Creek or something for that matter. So one thing we also discussed is likely when we formally open up the application window, it was more for you all, not the ticker this today, but we would bring in the chair and vice chair to help us with that selection process since the chair makes appointments to the committees and things like that.
I think that's a great idea, what you're talking about. I mean, we don't have to limit ourselves, but you don't want it too big, too. Then it becomes unwieldy.
Quick clarification. So you're thinking about your goal with the public, it's not just 5 public citizens at large, but 5 people who are riparian owners.
Ideally, yes, if we can get that. Yeah. Surprisingly, people usually aren't beating down the door to volunteer to write ordinances, but we have had quite a few emails on this one so far. So, Chief Teller?
Yeah, a couple of process questions. So, under reports, this would probably be, once it gets moving, there'll be a report to the group, okay. And also, too, on the city website, under planning, under projects, would that also be where, like, the minutes would be? So if I wanted to go read them and I could find them, or the public could find them and whatever, okay, good, thank you.
Yeah, and we're envisioning a similar model, too, for the short-term rental limitations, but again, we want to hear the feedback from the joint session first.
I mean, these committee meetings will be public meetings.
Yep. They will be public, they'll be noticed properly and all that. So.
Okay.
And the way they went last time, we had many, many experts attend almost every single meeting. So I would imagine there are still the same committed orgs in town that would likely make their attendance at every committee meeting, even though they're not formally a part of the committee. They were definitely present and involved in the conversation.
And I can say that there is, from the planning department, a more proactive effort to get public involvement and to have a higher profile. Not that I couldn't find the meeting agendas and attend every single meeting as a member of the general public, starting 5 years ago, whatever. But I wouldn't be surprised if more people are paying attention to it now than were then, especially once the pandemic hit.
Yeah, that changed a lot of the dynamic, that's for sure, at that time. Yeah, we've had conversations this week, too, about some subject matter experts. Obviously, we have local ones we can bring in. We talked about potentially reaching out to the Michigan Association of Planning. They do a lot of trainings. Like, for instance, they did one on riparian environments probably 6-7 years ago up in Petoskey, and people from around northern Michigan came. So we could potentially host something on that subject, but not limit it to just the committee, but also make it broader to other people in the region to come to. So kicking around some ideas. East Bay Township did that maybe 2 years ago. They had a map training there that many of you all were invited to. Some went, but they hosted it, but it was open to anyone in the area.
One other idea that we did last time is we did do, was it on 1 or 2? There were a couple meetings where we did field trips so that people could actually see all of the tributaries, and I highly recommend that. I think it was really valuable. for us to get eyes on all of those properties.
That's a great idea, yeah.
And what some property owners may be doing for
That
riparian
was,
buffers.
yes,
Yeah, or
Kids
not
Creek
doing.
especially.
Yeah.
It was
because
very
if you're
interesting.
not in that part of town, you might not realize that, oh, somebody has a fence entirely across the street, or they can
Street
build.
or creek?
Creek,
The creek.
in the creek.
In the creek.
I think
Yeah.
I noticed.
Or they're building essentially a wooden wall of their deck that goes right down into the creek.
Exactly.
You wouldn't see that on Boardman Lake or on Grand Traverse Bay the same way.
Correct.
And except for that one crazy individual that kayaks down Kids Creek, a lot of people don't see it from the perspective of the creek itself.
Is that the same crazy guy that's carrying it down the sidewalk?
Yeah, it's
Yeah,
that one.
that guy right here.
Okay, does anybody else have any comments on this? I think it's a very aggressive plan myself, but I love all the input that's included and the direction it's going. It's so exciting to have it back up in front of everybody again. So you don't need any action from us, just comments, correct? Any other comments? All right, well, thank you for all your hard work on this. I can't wait to see it get started. So the next is E, Planning Commission 2024 Projects Timeline, and that's what this map is for, or not map, but
Yeah, so on your desk was the
Timeline.
Gantt chart that was in your packets. I know it's a lot on there, so we printed it off for you. It might make it a little easier to see. And this is draft. It's subject to change and tentative, but after our last meeting, when you discussed some of the items that you were prioritizing as goals and some of the projects we already had in the queue, we wanted to kind of lay this out for ourselves, for you, and for the public to understand. So at the top, we have each of the months through the calendar year. And the number below each month is the Sunday of the week. So Sunday, February 4th, so essentially the first week, the second week. And then we broke down the projects that we have and the different steps that we have within it. So the CIP is what we're currently working on. That's fairly short. We introduced it here on the 6th. We have a study session the 21st. We do have a number of items on that joint study session. So I don't know that we'll have the opportunity to talk about much there, but we will definitely be talking about it again when the public hearing is held on March 5th. So that white number that you see is a Planning Commission meeting date, just so you have that in there as when it will be discussed formally. The next item is the master plan and the mobility action plan review and approval. So we did receive Sunday the draft plan, the planning department staff, and we are currently reviewing it. To let you know how it's structured, there is what I kind of call like the meat of the plan. We refer to it as the magazine. So it's about 60 pages. It's what you typically find at the end of the plan, but it's really the heart of what the plan is telling you. It's the executive summary, the future land use plan, the guiding principles, the action plan, the stuff that really is going to guide you as the document. The second part is all the background information that led to that magazine part. So if someone wanted to take a deeper dive into it, they'd be able to go to that section on demographic or housing. What we didn't want, and this goes back to the fact that a master plan should be a compendium of your community's information, telling your story. We didn't want that to bog down really the priorities in the plan. So that's why we've kind of separated them out. And once we got it, we're glad we did, because that second part is 421 pages long. But it includes everything. So all the free response survey or free form survey responses where people can write in whatever. There's probably all 80 pages of that, maybe 100. So that's in there though, but we didn't want to keep that hidden. We wanted to keep it as part of the plan so people can see what others were saying and stuff like that. So we are reading I'm on page 13 right now. Get done this week. So trying to figure out how to get that all done. The goal is that we will submit the department revisions or edits or anything like that to the consultant at the beginning of next week, meet with them to go over it. They'll start incorporating those. Then that draft will go to the leadership team. So when you see on there the March 20 or February 21st, that's our study session. I think it is, the 20th is when we'll be meeting in March with the
So the day
leadership team.
before,
Yeah.
okay.
So we are really trying to give them enough time to wrap their heads around. Now, they've been reviewing all those chapters all along, so it's not new to them. They may be able to go through it a little quicker. But once we distribute it to the leadership team, we'll likely distribute it to you all as well. So you can begin reading it. Just know that there may be some edits that come out of the leadership team process. They've had their chance already, so, they're just kind of making sure that what they've called for has been incorporated. That's the goal.
How long will we have with that, Dave?
What's that?
When are you going to release that to the leadership team? To be ready for the discussion on February 20th?
March 20th. So we're going to send it to
Oh, you're
them
right, March
at the beginning
20th,
of
okay.
March.
Okay.
And again, it's not new to them, so many of them have seen that already. And then we'll meet with them on the 20th, where they'll take their action. Those edits will get incorporated, and then it'll be distributed to the Planning Commission and the City Commission.
Okay.
So you'll notice there at the end of March, really April 2nd being the
Second.
first one, that we have a number of extra meetings scheduled. And we've been saying this for a long
6 and
time.
23
There were some periods where we didn't have things on the agenda, and we didn't have meetings, but I kept saying, just know that there's going to be extra meetings coming. Because this is the master plan and mobility action plan review. You've already received the draft mobility action plan. So the way that we discussed coordinating this, as we did last Friday, is I think on the 2nd, we'll be introducing both plans, formally to the Planning Commission at that meeting with, and correct me if I'm wrong on any of this, the two bodies. And then we'll be alternating each week. Like 1 week we'll work on the master plan, and we'll tell you which chapters we intend to cover, so you know what to read specifically and discuss. The next week we'll go to the mobility action plan. We did that for a number of reasons. One, the consultants in some cases are coming from out of town, so instead of coming every week, if we could focus, okay, you're going to talk about yours more on this week, then you'll talk about yours on this week, and then kind of help you digest through that. Leading up to the 7th, which will be the end of it, and we would ask that at that point, if we're done with the review and the Planning Commission is comfortable with the edits that have been identified and incorporated, that it be sent to the City Commission. That's when the City Commission will release it for the required 63-day review period. At that point, no action can be taken, no public hearing can be held until that clock winds down. So while that clock is ticking is when we intend to go through with the City Commission, similarly to the Planning Commission, each of the components of the plan. And we will also be aiming for the end of June, some sort of public open house. So we mark 3 weeks in there. We don't have a date pinned down yet. We've done all of these events throughout the community. We'll probably hold this one at the governmental center, where we maybe, if you came to the joint one in October of '22, we kind of had the two plans in one room. So we might do that here, where we maybe set up the master plan elements in this room and the mobility plan and the training room, and people can kind of go back and forth and speak with staff, planning commissioners, city commissioners if they desire to attend, and we hope that they do, as well as the consultants. And then we'll come back to the Planning Commission once that is done. The Planning Commission has to hold a public hearing on it per law, and then they have to make a motion to adopt it. The City Commission has, through ordinance, also made it required that they have to adopt it too. So the Planning Commission and City Commission would both have to adopt the plan.
After the 63-day public review,
Yeah,
though.
after the 63-day. Yep.
So one question I have is, so the leadership team is looking at it on March 20th, and then we're going to start discussing it April 2nd.
Mm-hmm.
How much are we reading before each of these meetings? Just to make sure we have enough time.
Yeah, the exact amount, I can't tell you right now, but from our meeting on Friday, we asked both teams to kind of create a list for us that we can distribute, like we intend this day and this day. In fact, we're leaving the 7th as a day where we don't have to review, but if we can't get through everything that we prescribe and we need an extra day, it's on the calendars and we can use it then.
Chief Tiller.
Right, Sean, line 10, public open house for master plan. So we looking at, you got 3 squares, right? So we're looking at 3 different events, or one event?
One event to occur somewhere in that 3-week period.
Okay,
Yep, we haven't figured out that far yet exactly when and
okay.
where.
Might I respectfully suggest 2?
2 being the B.
Somewhere in there, somewhere, 2 events. Well, one in
2
the
events,
evening,
okay.
which is historically
separate.
kind of our traditional, and maybe one during the day.
Yeah, we can do that. We could even do it all on the same day where, well, then if people happen to be out of town, they don't get to come to another one. But yeah, let's think
I mean,
about that.
you know, there's a lot of people that have a lot of mobility during the day, and then there's a lot of people that, you know, would be more likely to attend in the evening, eat dinner, kids are at the house. You can go out for a date night, come down, check out the master plan, you know, why not?
Hottest date in town.
Yeah. All right, thank you.
All right, good idea, thank you. All right, so that is a rough overview of that plan. Again, we'll be discussing it again on the 21st. The next one we hit at in the announcements, and that's the SLUP for the Safe Harbor Emergency Shelter. So their deadline to get the application to us is the 20th, per the bylaws there, 14 days ahead of time. We did meet with them again today. I think I have another meeting tomorrow. So that's starting to move along. There's a lot to this beyond just the SLUP that they're working out. So I'm really most privy to the land use component, so that's what I'm most familiar with. But we'll conduct our staff report on that. It'll come to the Planning Commission for introduction, similar to what occurred today with Boardman Building LLC, where you can move to set the public hearing. There will be the study session in between then and the public hearing, so we can have Safe Harbor come back, answer any questions, you know, really sit with the Planning Commission and dive into the topics more. And then we would have that public hearing on the 2nd, and then a recommendation would be made to the City Commission, who will have the ultimate approval authority on that application. So they're working on a pretty tight timeline. The shelter, I believe, with their current SLUP, can't go past the end of May. Right now, they operate through the end of April, but the SLUP does allow them to go through. But when they did an amendment, there was a provision put in there, I think the 2019 amendment, that some components of it, like the operation duration, can be approved by the City Commission to modify. So they may ask to extend the season, because in the event that the City Commission approves it, they will need to advertise to hire new people, train the new people, and so I think they're trying to work out those mechanics of, they don't want to close down the shelter for 2 months just to open it back up and, you know, make everyone leave and then come back. So that is something, if you have questions on, I would welcome you to ask that on our joint, or at our joint study session with them. The next one, Leslie went over with us already. That's riparian buffer ordinance. So took her work plan and incorporated it into this Gantt chart for you, so you can kind of see it visually. But please refer to her work plan if you're looking for more detail. This is just the high-level steps. And then the last thing that we need to add in there is the short-term rental cap discussion, but we're waiting till after the joint session to figure out what direction the City Commission provides to the Planning Commission and what steps you want to take from there. But we have earmarked that at the bottom of the chart. And then this is something, as we get through some of these items, you know, we can revisit later in the year, as we discussed in January, once the master plan gets adopted, and what we want to start working on next.
Yep.
So it's some big tasks, but some exciting ones.
Yeah, very good one.
I could offer a comment on that last item, the short-term rental caps. I am a bit uncomfortable with characterizing it as a cap right now, only because what I recall of our conversation at the last meeting was that we wanted to understand and try to quantify the impact of short-term rentals on our year-round housing supply, and that even part-year occupancy vacation homes were going to be part of that analysis. So I guess I am seeing that exploration, that project, as something a bit broader and more in-depth than a description of it as applying caps might imply. So I don't know if I'm standing out here in the field all by myself, but I think this requires a really in-depth analysis, and I'd like to start lobbying for that right now.
Yeah, I mean, this was presented in January as a discussion on caps specifically, because that's what the planning commission had discussed in the
And then I
past.
recall the conversation went a bit further beyond just caps to talk about, adjusting the percentages that were permitted in various zoning districts.
That's the
and-
cap, yeah, that is
That's
a
the
cap by
cap.
definition. Is capping how many in a building, for instance, could be done, or whether it's going to be by building or by district and stuff like that.
So this is not considered to include the option for an overall citywide maximum number, which is
It
where, the
could.
way I
Well,
would,
I mean,
I would
that's-
imply,
that's
I would
something-
interpret a
That's
cap.
something for the committee to ultimately decide who's working on it, yeah.
It'll be a cap.
Yeah, it's still by definition would be a
cap.
cap.
I mean, the only other word that I think could be used as like a synonym would be like restrictions, but I think cap is more appealing than a restriction.
It's
Well,
certainly
it's more honest to what the planning commission has
Correct.
discussed in the
and
past
it's
that led to
more
that discussion.
economical, straightforward as a short term to refer to it.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of different reforms that we could discuss pertaining to short-term rentals, but if the overall goal is looking at the overall number and distribution of short-term rentals and putting a downward pressure on that, that is, by definition, a cap in one way or another. There is a cap right now in absolute terms, we just don't have that quantified, but between where it's permitted, short-term rentals are currently permitted, and how dense you can build in those areas, and what exists, there is a finite limit to how many short-term rentals there can be, but
Perhaps what I'm looking for is way beyond land use options, and I need to take this to city commission. Thank you.
You're welcome. Any other comments on this plan? Right. Right, then we can move on. We don't have a, good job, everyone. All right, so where are we now? That's it, right? Okay. So now we're down to reports. Are there any reports? I know who.
Not at this time. The Joint
Joint.
Planning Commission met last week, I believe it was. They had commissioned a study using Hubble Roth Clark, engineering consultant of the cities, and Gordy Frazier, Garfield Township's engineer of record, to do an infrastructure study out at the Commons. That was funded by the Brownfield Redevelopment Authority, who I believe approved up to $400,000 to be spent. The contract was about $160,000, maybe $165,000 for the report. But as was to be expected, once the consultants got out in the field, they noticed some other items that went beyond their original scope. So they stuck to the scope. Part of that process also included meeting with property owners like the Minervinis, meeting with the drain commissioner. So they had some additional work that they felt warranted looking into. Stormwater is a big issue because the stormwater that the Commons deals with doesn't all originate at the Commons. So how is that impacting the infrastructure at the Commons? So we discussed that with the Planning Commission, the Joint Planning Commission, last week, and they were supportive of having HRC and GFA put together a refined scope of work and budget proposal that will then take back to the Brownfield Redevelopment Authority to see if they'd be willing to fund that additional work. It, again, is within their original approved spending cap on that. So that was really the gist of the meeting. They did also discuss Garfield Township. It's not in the Commons limit, but in the Commons natural area, as it's called, which is actually part of Garfield Township. It's basically the Ridge wooded area. They did an update to their Parks Master Plan and did a whole trail plan for that location, and they were successful in receiving a DNR Trust Fund development grant, so they will begin working on making the first phase of improvements to the trail, which will be a universally accessible loop throughout the main area where there isn't too much grade. It utilizes a lot of the kind of like fire road that's out there right now, I would call it, not really the single track, but the wider area. And they have additional phases that they'll be working on in the future, but that was all they really talked about.
the Board of Zoning Appeals has not met.
February 13th meeting is canceled.
Oh, is it?
Yeah.
Okay, good to know. I was
Historic
wondering about-
District Commission, we don't have any commissioners on that, but they held that one a couple weeks ago. was it a porch addition or?
It was a exterior remodel, adding a porch, actually bringing it back to, in my opinion, historical nature. Mhm.
And then that's,
Team hasn't met.
no, not yet. And then other than that, city commission, any updates?
Good meeting. Any updates for city commission?
Not as pertains to planning and zoning.
Okay.
I think the city manager has put out the RFP for the strategic plan, or is going
Yes.
to? Okay.
It
Well,
was published on Sunday.
On Sunday? Okay, so that'll be forthcoming. We are accepting bids on Friday at 10 a.m. for the CDBG program. If you guys aren't familiar with that, as our population has increased in this area, we officially became a Metropolitan Planning Organization, or an MPO, which is a census-defined boundary within a development area, and it really forces regional planning for transportation issues and opens up federal funding opportunities. But since we are the core community in that MPO, we are now a CDBG entitlement grantee. So this opens the city up to approximately $372,000 a year that we can use for qualified projects. Most of them have to relate to low to moderate income housing or housing programs that are targeted at specific demographics. So it's federal money, so there's a million strings attached and paperwork and auditing that has to be done. The first thing that needs to be done is we have to create a 5-year comprehensive plan of how we plan to use that money over the next 5 years. And then each year you have to update an annual work plan. So we are accepting the proposals for the firms that are familiar with this and the language and all the requirements to get us started with that. So of the $372,000, we can use 20% each year for administration, so covering the cost to help get these plans or to fund a position or part of a position or to contract out the administration of it. 15% can be used for public services, so in other words, you could use a nonprofit that you can help fund their operations. You are required to still do an RFP. It could be a very tailored, specific RFP, but for example, just so you know, because a group has met to discuss it, some of that funding may go towards helping to pay for staff at Safe Harbor, because that's kind of the population that this funding is geared towards. And then from there, there's a lot of flexibility in how you use that. Some larger communities that have, over $1 million a year have more robust programs, such as housing rehabilitation programs and things like that. We met with Northern Michigan Community Action Agency, I believe that's, or Northwest Michigan Community Action Agency, and they do a weatherization program in the county. They, to their memory, have never done one within the city because our census tracts don't meet the demographic qualifications for it. So that's going to be part of the discussion, like how can we really utilize it? One thing that was recommended to us to help reduce the administrative burden, since we don't have a big pot of money, is maybe focusing on one big project each year. So it could be a capital project. In the example of Safe Harbor, maybe it's an improvement to the facility. Maybe it needs AC to go year-round. I don't know, but that's just an example that comes to my mind. So that is stuff that we'll be working through. Planning Commission will be part of that. It'll be a public process. We have public hearings, public input sessions, and things of that nature. But we're excited to get that up and running. We're learning a lot. Again, it's like a different language working with federal funding. So hopefully we'll get that straightened up with the guidance of some consultant.
Excellent. If there are no more reports, public comment.
Sorry to keep you. Tim Werner, 608 West 7th Street. So I was in communication with the executive director at Light and Power, so she corrected me. No, the Light and Power Board did not officially approve the climate action plan. We were presented like an update, and parts of it will be rolled out and in front of us, but it was a comprehensive draft, and everybody was shaking their heads yes, positively, and I mistook that for, yeah, we all said yes, but we didn't officially say yes. And then the second item to the riparian buffer zone, having not dealt with the riparian buffer zone necessarily, but stormwater off and on for the past 10 years in my position as a city commissioner, I would encourage those of you who end up on that committee To the extent possible, try to deal with what are the pollutants, like what is it that you're actually concerned about and where is it coming from, and talking about that and not fall into what I consider a trap of just arbitrary, oh, should it be 20 feet or 30 feet? Because that's really meaningless, especially because we have pipes everywhere, which gets me to my second half of it, which is stormwater. And if you can be successful in actually talking about pollutants, that could help inspire us as a city and the city commission specifically to address stormwater, which we've been struggling with for a very long time, because we could have things to look at as far as, oh, heavy metals from brake pads, like that's coming from all these different paved surfaces. And so we need to do something about that, because the pipes just take it here to there and it makes distance meaningless. So again, it's a huge lift, because if it was easy, we would have already done it. And so I wish you the best, but again, to the extent possible, avoid arbitrary distances and try to focus on what it is you're trying to like keep out of the water system. Thank you.
Thank you. I think that is it. Keep losing my. Okay, does anybody have anything else to say? If not, we're going to adjourn.
I move we adjourn.
Thank you. I just want to remind you, now that we passed the bylaws, our next meeting starts at 6 o'clock. Make sure you change it all in your. And it's on a Wednesday, correct. All right, thanks, everyone. Thank you.
It'll be in the bigger room, right? Because it'll be everybody.
It's the first time we've had a full planning commission in like.
I know. Anna and Shay, can you hang for a minute? I just want to ask you something.
It'll be very full.
Tim, does that plan have